She believed words could be louder than fear. For a while, no one proved her wrong. Her name was Malala Yousafzai, 15 years old, a schoolgirl in Pakistan's Swat Valley, a place where mountains pressed against the sky and silence had become a survival tool. She lived in a region where the Taliban had forbidden girls from attending school, where buses were stopped, where buildings were burned, where the penalty for defiance was not written in law, but carried in the hands of men who believed God spoke only through them. She kept speaking anyway, not loudly, not recklessly, but clearly. She wrote a blog under a pseudonym for the BBC, describing what it felt like to live under occupation by men who believed education was a sin for daughters. She used simple language. She spoke about her school, about her friends, about the fear that followed her to class and home again, about teachers who whispered lessons in rooms with covered windows, about girls who stopped coming altogether, about the sound of footsteps that made everyone freeze, about mornings when the schools stayed closed and no one explained why, about the slow disappearance of normal life. The international press began noticing. Camera crews arrived in SWAT, documentary filmmakers, journalists looking for a story that could be told without disclaimers. Malala's father, Ziauddin, ran a school. He believed in her voice. He believed she had the right to use it. So when reporters asked to speak with a student, he allowed it. And Malala answered their questions, calm, thoughtful, certain. She spoke about what was being taken, about what was being destroyed, about futures that were being erased before they could begin. She spoke in a tone that suggested she believed someone was listening. She appeared on television. She spoke at events. She gave interviews in Urdu and broken English, her words careful but unyielding. Education was not a privilege. It was a right. Girls deserved classrooms. They deserved futures. She said these things in a valley where men with rifles decided which futures were permitted. She said them knowing the cost, or believing she knew. She was 15, old enough to understand danger, young enough to believe courage could outrun it. Her visibility grew. So did the silence around her. At school, some parents stopped letting their daughters sit near her. On the street, men watched her differently. At home, her mother began checking the locks twice each night. Threats came, unsigned notes, murmured warnings, messages passed through intermediaries. The Taliban were watching. They knew her name now, not the pseudonym, her real name, Malala Yousafzai, daughter of Ziauddin. The girl who would not stop talking, the girl who had made herself visible. Her father received calls, warnings from friends, suggestions to send her away, to another city, another country, somewhere the speaking could stop without consequence. He considered it. She refused. This was her home, her valley. If she left, what would her words have meant? What would any of it have been for? She had already spoken. The damage, if there was damage, was done. Running now would not undo it. It would only prove that fear had won. She kept attending school, kept speaking, kept appearing in front of cameras. The international attention felt like a shield. It felt like if enough people outside Pakistan knew her name, she would be untouchable. That visibility could be armor, that the world's eyes could keep her safe. It was a reasonable belief. It was also wrong. It was October 9th, 2012. A Tuesday. The school day had ended. Malala boarded the bus with her classmates, girls in uniform, backpacks heavy with books they were not supposed to need. The bus pulled away from the gates. The air inside was warm, thick with afternoon heat and the smell of dust. The girls talked, laughed. Malala sat near the back. She had an exam coming. She was thinking about studying, about whether she had remembered to pack her notes, about small things, ordinary things. The bus slowed. A young man stepped into the road. He raised his hand. The driver stopped. The man climbed aboard. He was not in uniform. He carried no visible weapon at first. He looked at the rows of girls. He asked a question. "Who is Malala?" No one answered. The girls knew what the question meant. The silence inside the bus stretched. The man's eyes moved across faces. Someone's gaze shifted, just slightly, just enough. He turned toward the back, toward her. She did not speak, did not move. She had believed, perhaps until that exact second, that the world would intervene, that someone would step between her and what she had always known was coming. But there was no one, just a man, a gun, and the girl who had spoken when silence was the only safe option. He fired. Once. The bullet entered above her left eye. It traveled through her skull, along the length of her brain, and lodged near her shoulder. She collapsed. Blood spread quickly. The other girls screamed. The man stepped off the bus and walked away. No pursuit, no sirens, just the aftermath, just the sound of crying and the smell of gunpowder and a 15-year-old girl bleeding onto the floor of a school bus. Malala was unconscious, bleeding, a hospital in Peshawar, then Rawalpindi, then, when it became clear Pakistan could not save her, a military air ambulance to Birmingham, England. She arrived in a coma. Surgeons removed part of her skull to relieve swelling. They repaired the damage, as much as damage like that can be repaired. They waited. Her parents waited. The world waited. She woke. Not all at once, not cleanly. She woke to a language she barely spoke in a country she had never been to, surrounded by faces she did not recognize. Her left side was weak. Her hearing was damaged. Her face was partially paralyzed. But she was alive. And that, everyone kept saying, was a miracle. The girl who had been shot in the head had survived. The girl who had spoken for education had lived. It was a story people wanted to tell, a story with a hopeful ending. It did not feel like a miracle. It felt like exile. Her family joined her in England. They could not return to Pakistan. The Taliban had made that clear. They released statements, videos, messages promising that if Malala returned, they would finish what they started. If her father returned, the same. If her brothers returned, the same. The entire family was erased from Swat, from the valley, from the place they had called home, the house they had lived in, the school her father had built, the street she had walked. All of it was gone, not destroyed, just unreachable. A life that existed only in memory now. Malala recovered slowly. Months of surgeries, rehabilitation, learning to walk steadily again, learning to hear from one side, learning to smile with a face that no longer moved the way it once had. And during all of it, the world watched. The international press that had once amplified her voice now documented her survival. The story grew larger than her, larger than SWAT. It became a symbol, an inspiration, a narrative of courage and resilience that fit neatly into headlines. The girl who survived, the girl who refused to be silenced, the girl who kept speaking even after a bullet tried to stop her. But inside the hospital room, away from cameras, the reality was quieter, harsher. She had survived, yes, but survival was not the same as safety. It was not the same as return. She would never go back to her school, never walk through her neighborhood, never sit in her father's office and listen to him prepare lessons. All of that was gone, not paused, not delayed, gone. The cost of speaking had been paid, and it was permanent. She continued speaking. What else was there to do? She had paid the cost already. The bullet had taken what it took. Stopping now would not bring any of it back. So she spoke at the United Nations. She established a fund for girls' education. She traveled to refugee camps, to conflict zones, to places where girls still could not go to school. And in 2014, at 17 years old, she became the youngest person ever to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. The ceremony was in Oslo. The hall was filled. The applause was long. Her family was there, world leaders, journalists. The speeches were moving, the recognition was global. But Pakistan's government did not send a representative. The Prime Minister did not acknowledge the award. In some regions of her home country, The reaction was not pride. It was suspicion, anger, claims that she was a Western tool, that her story was exaggerated, that the shooting had been staged, that she had betrayed her country by speaking to foreigners, that she had shamed Pakistan on the world stage. And the Taliban, they released another statement. She was still a target. She would always be a target. Speaking had not made her safe. Surviving had not made her safe. The Nobel Prize had not made her safe. The world's attention had not made her safe. Nothing had made her safe. Safety was not something that existed for her anymore. She lived in England now, Birmingham, a city where the mountains did not press against the sky, where school was a right, not a risk, where she could walk to class without checking the street for men who watched too long. But it was not home. It would never be home. She had become a citizen of the world, people said, a global advocate, a voice for millions, an inspiration, a hero. But the cost of that voice was a childhood she would never get back, a valley she could not return to, a family that could not go home, friends she would never see again, a language that was slipping, a place that had become memory. She was 17 years old, and she had already lost more than most people lose in a lifetime. The world called her a hero, and maybe she was. But heroism had not protected her. It had not saved her from the bullet. It had not brought her home. It had only made her impossible to ignore. And that, in the end, was both the point and the price. She had wanted to be heard. She had succeeded. But being heard had cost her everything that came before the hearing. She had believed words could be louder than fear. She had been right, but no one had told her how much it would cost to prove it. No one had told her that being heard meant never being safe again, that speaking up meant living in exile, that courage was not a shield, it was a sentence, a life sentence, one that began the moment she opened her mouth and would continue for as long as she lived. Years would pass. More speeches, more awards, more cameras, more stories about the girl who survived, but survival was not victory. It was just survival. And every time she stood in front of a microphone, every time she accepted another honor, every time someone called her brave, there was a part of her that remembered the bus, the man, the question, the silence before the shot. The moment when she realized the world was not going to save her, that visibility was not armor, that courage was not protection. She would keep speaking. She had no choice now. Stopping would mean the bullet had won. Stopping would mean the exile had been for nothing. Stopping would mean the girls still waiting for classrooms would wait forever. So she kept going, kept traveling, kept advocating, kept living in a country that was not hers, speaking a language that was not hers, carrying a story that had become larger than her life, carrying a name that was known everywhere except the place she actually wanted to be known. But late at night, in the quiet hours when the cameras were off and the speeches were finished, she was still just a girl who had wanted to go to school, a girl who had spoken up because someone had to. A girl who had believed the world would protect her if she was loud enough, clear enough, brave enough. A girl who had learned that belief was not the same as truth. She had been wrong about that. The world had listened. The world had watched. The world had given her awards, but the world had not kept her safe, and it never would. Safety was not something you earned by speaking the truth. Safety was what you lost. Safety was the price, and once it was gone, it did not come back. Not with awards, not with recognition, not with global fame. Once you spoke, once your name was known, once the world decided you were a symbol, there was no going back. Not to the valley, not to the bus, not to the girl who had sat in the back row thinking about an exam, unaware that in 30 seconds her entire life would end and begin again in the same breath. She survived the shot, but she would spend the rest of her life living in its echo. Some costs are paid once, others are paid every single day.